Yeah, I was holding off. I was waiting for you, DK.
Okay, because I know we only have like a half hour planned, and Nostr's sort of been on our collective minds, I think, a bit. Welcome to the Curious DK podcast, where we talk about Nostr, Bitcoin, AI, and other technology topics I'm following. I'm an angel investor and entrepreneur with over 2 decades of experience in Silicon Valley building relationships, technologies, and products to improve people's lives. In this episode, we catch up with Keyan, who's the founder of Stacker.News, a subreddit-like platform that incorporates Bitcoin as a signal of information quality in a media platform. This platform has obvious relevance to the emerging technologies being built around Nostr, so I was excited to catch up with Keyan and hear his thinking and learning about the latest with Stacker.News and Nostr. We are also joined by Max Webster, who is the founder of Hivemind Ventures, a venture capital firm that invested in Stacker.News and is betting big on funding companies within the emerging Lightning Network and Nostr ecosystems. I had a great time discussing and learning real time about the possibilities for these new technologies. I hope you enjoy listening along and learning with us. This is an ad-free podcast. If you find it valuable, you can send me a tip at my Lightning address, dk@stacker.news. Keyan, I met you through Twitter because I saw Stacker News, and I think the first DM I sent you was, "Thanks for building this. I'm really excited about this." And then, I was fortunate over time as you were putting together some fundraising to get more formally involved. And I'm a big fan of Stacker News, but I think I've become an even bigger fan of you as a thinker who's built Stacker News and could do all kinds of interesting things. So, so that's some of the Stacker News story. And then Max, I think I met also about a year ago or so, probably. So I think that was around when we were getting together on the Discord a lot, and just wanted to kind of meet more people looking at how to build things to make Bitcoin better and sort of the ecosystem around things that could be built now that we have this kind of internet currency. And yeah, so we got connected and have had a lot of fun chats, and feels like we have stuff to talk about every day now. So thanks. But anyway, that's sort of in my words. But why don't you give a little bit of sort of your own intro? Maybe Keyan, you want to go first?
Yeah. So I'm the founder of Stacker News. I usually describe Stacker News as like Reddit, but the karma is Bitcoin, and that's kind of just the highest level thing. There are other differences too. Like you have to spend a little money to post and comment, which we call the Sybil Bitcoiners call the Sybil resistance. But I think the main point is like you pay to participate on Stacker News, but you also get paid. And that we think is kind of new. There are other like little things we do, like we use like Bitcoin to determine the ranking of items, and have some ideas around how that might increase the signal of posts. We also, any revenue we earn, we give back to users on a daily basis, the best users, using a trust algorithm called Web of Trust for that. And that might dovetail into some of the Nostr talk we'll have later. But that's kind of the broad overview. It's a Reddit-like platform that tries to integrate Bitcoin as deeply as possible, and tries to do as much as it can with Bitcoin. One of my big gripes is Bitcoin gets treated like as a static asset, and I just think it can be used for so much more. Yep. And that's what I'm really passionate about in Bitcoin. I mean, I love it as a store of value too, but it can do things it can allow us to do things that we weren't able to do without it. And yeah,
that's great. Thanks, Keyan. All right, and Max, do you want to give a little
intro
on yourself?
So I'm Max. I am the founder of Hivemind Ventures, a pre-seed and seed fund focused on Bitcoin, Lightning Network, and increasingly, I'm excited about Nostr, and I know we'll talk more about that today. But I had the great pleasure. Well, I guess even before I met you, Keyan, I was a user on Stacker News. I was lurking back in like fall 2021, and I thought the site was like a beautiful site, best sort of UX I'd seen for a Bitcoin Lightning app to date. And I saw some early community developing there, a lot of really exciting conversation. Had the great opportunity to then invest, I guess, leading both Keyan's pre-seed round and then seed round last year. and I am, a daily addicted user to Stacker News. But like you, DK, even though I think the site is incredible and I love all the different ways it's developed, I'm more a fan of Keyan and like just the way he thinks about things. And I'm excited to see where he's going to take it.
Yeah, I feel like some of the stuff that Keyan always sort of reminds me on accident is I don't even realize these things that he just has so in his core that really shape the way I see the site, see his thinking. So, for example, I invested. I didn't realize the whole thing was open source, and I love that it is. Like, I think that's the right call, and I love that Keyan is principled and understands why that's important. But I was sort of like delighted after the fact to find that out.
And not to spend too much time bragging on Keyan here, because I know it's probably a little awkward for him. But I will say it's also just phenomenal how fast you ship Keyan. Like when you kind of had this idea around web of trust, and then like immediately you ship the algorithm. And then we had talked about sort of this like value rank using Satoshis to help influence signal. I put out this piece called How to Start Google that you gave me some great feedback for. We've been discussing. And then within like a couple of weeks, it was just like, oh, by the way, I've already shipped it. And then which I'm sure we'll talk about with Nostr later, like, oh, what if we could do this, like, Nostr identity verification, and like within a day, it was like, oh, it's out. So I'll stop now. But
it took
right,
to be fair, it took me a little bit longer on the Nostr stuff because I was working on something else for a while, and it took prodding from all of you to get me, the users included, to get me to implement it. So I want to at least admit that.
So one thing that I think would be kind of a fun starting point is just to understand, like, what have you learned so far from operating Stacker News, and sort of what have turned out to be maybe there's some surprising challenges along the way that you didn't expect, or maybe sort of it could be surprises to the upside, surprises to the downside. But what sort of have you learned in the process of building it?
I mean, those questions are always good, and because they're difficult. But I think it's difficult getting people onboarded to Lightning. So this is something that when I first built Stacker News, I started out, users would get 2 free posts and 3 free comments, or I think, or no, 5 free comments. That was the distribution. And the idea was that most people want to get started really easily and maybe don't want to like load up a wallet, or maybe they don't even have Bitcoin on Lightning. Before I had built Stacker News, I hadn't done much interaction with Lightning in general. I was excited about it, but part of building Stacker News was interacting with Lightning and figuring out what it's capable of. So that's how it started out. At some point, people started abusing that a little bit, and so that was kind of surprising. And then so we decided to introduce no free posts. You have to start paying, and that ended up slowing down like growth. We noticed new users were signing up, and the friction was too high to like load a wallet. So I think like the ramp up maybe for a new user onto a Lightning product needs to be a very shallow incline. And so that was something we kind of learned, and it's probably true of any new technology. It just needs to be like dead simple to get people started. So yeah, I think you probably can't just. One of the things we learned is you can't just force people into a new like paradigm. You kind of have to mix it with the existing paradigm, and that was another decision why Stacker News is centralized and started out centralized. We'll be talking about more decentralized social media, but the UX is familiar. It's like easy. Maybe Stacker News. Maybe Stacker News, the way I envisioned it, with all of this kind of incentive structure based on Bitcoin, wouldn't land with people. Maybe it wouldn't make sense, and if it doesn't land, then the decentralized version certainly isn't going to land, because the UX is going to be so much worse. So that's like another example of like having a familiar experience to introduce people to new experiences in, and I think that's maybe one of the bigger learnings. But the whole thing I try to think about a lot with Stacker News is just incentives. Like how do you get people to, how do you structure the game theory in a community such that people behave in like more of the community's interest than they might otherwise. And I think that's really interesting. That's what fascinates me about Bitcoin, is that it just kind of runs, and it encourages people to like live their lives around it, with its incentives. And so I think for Bitcoin builders, I think that's really the goalpost, is how do you build a product that's as good as Bitcoin in terms of its incentives. And that's what I think about a lot, I guess. But I've learned a lot. I mean, UX matters in a consumer app. I mean, that's kind of obvious stuff, but it's really that new user path needs to be really dead simple, I think.
Right. Is that an area right now? It sounds like you used to have a few free posts and then you shut that off because it had maybe some abuse. Is that an area that you're constantly iterating, exploring, and testing, or do you feel like you kind of have that roughly how you want right now?
Right now, it's fairly good. So what we do right now is we kind of partition users based on whether they paid for a post or not, and then we have a decent portion of our active user base who participates in onboarding them with Bitcoin. So their posts are hidden when they're free, and then we have like 10% of active users or so. We'll go through and give them Bitcoin to get started if they're posting in earnest, and then they're able to participate like anyone else on the site. And so we kind of built this ramp for them, and that feels pretty good. I think eventually at scale, you probably need, on those free posts, they need Web 2 defenses. They need CAPTCHAs, spam filtering, all that kind of stuff. But this, for right now, is like good enough MVP to protect the like main site stuff.
Mm-hmm. And what are the types of things that you're currently, like, what's top of mind for you? Do you want to grow the site or improve other features on the core site, or kind of look at, some of these more avant-garde topics that we're a little obsessed with, or where's your head right now?
This is probably the biggest struggle for me as a founder, is I have so many directions getting pulled on at a time. Mm-hmm. Within the last 24 hours, I've probably had like 10 feature requests. Mm-hmm. And so this is like, where do I go? And so it's really hard to build confidence around a direction when someone's like, look at this is really important to me. Mm-hmm. And like when you want to, like, I try to make myself as like vulnerable to empathetic feelings as possible, because I feel like that's what I need to do. Mm-hmm. And so it's a struggle, but I think I just have, like, I constantly have to recenter myself around the idea of like, I'm building this for me as, the generalizable version of me, not the esoteric version of me, and what that person wants, and then also fit that with what I think like excites me and gets me to move fast. And so I'm like, right now, occasionally it's like biding time and filling in some of the gaps in the product, like where people have been complaining for a long time or whatever, while we figure out like bigger strategy things and where to do experiments and stuff like that. And so just like honing in on more core user experience. We're working right now on like the onboarding for a new user, like how to make it the conversions a little better when they come, how to make it so they understand the site faster and can get started. Those kinds of things are important because you're constantly fighting churn in communities, and if you're like negative growth, the thing tends to die. So you really need to introduce new users kind of fast. So we think about those kinds of things just as like core product stuff, but there's so many ideas for things that I want to do. But a lot of it is, I think strategically, oftentimes it makes sense to just refine. And that's kind of what we've been attempting to do for, I don't know, the last few months or so, is just refine certain features and make them work better. And like we talked about the ranking algorithm and improving that, always revisiting the trust algorithm, that will be a never-ending pursuit probably. But like making those things better is kind of what I normally spend my time on. But I think a lot about, you know, like what do other communities on Stacker News look like? What other post types look like? How do we decentralize Stacker News? How do I avoid some of the pitfalls of centralization if decentralizing it isn't an option? These kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. And do you have like a process you work through those questions? Like, do you have a sounding board, or send out, you know, a couple friends on a signal, or how do you sort of think through those?
We have
Max.
Yeah, I complain enough to you guys in the investor updates, but I think. So the way we do this is I lay out kind of big ideas in like a Notion doc, and then it's like number of users impacted, like what it unlocks, how long it takes to work on, and that's kind of the template we use to lay out an idea. Mm-hmm. But that's roughly the process right now. And then it's like, what am I motivated? It's kind of sad, but it's like, or maybe not super, I don't know, mature, but it's like, whatever I feel very motivated to work on, because I know I'll just get it done, is kind of important too. And so that plays a huge role in nearly everything and that I end up deciding to do. Because if I'm not motivated to do something, it's a slog and I'll burn out or whatever. So
right. And do you feel like your motivation is usually coming from more like a technology idea that you hear about, or like maybe there's a new feature in a Lightning development kit, or is it more like a user's complaining about something and you want to address that, or how do you sort of handle the trade-offs there?
Honestly, I think it's mostly risk that attracts me, which is kind of weird, but I think it's what draws me to being a founder. Is I really loved working on Web of Trust. I really loved messing with the ranking algorithm and sats. I like doing things that are new. What I don't like doing something is trying to copy something that already exists elsewhere. Right. It's just so boring. It's like okay, they've had like, you know, they have like 20 engineers working on an editor at XYZ company. Right. That makes their editor great. And, you know, that's what I can hope to achieve as a single engineer. That's great. Maybe that's, you know, I could pat myself on the back for that. But did I move anything forward for anyone doing that? No. I don't. And so it kind of bores me. Right. So it's like the things that someone hasn't done yet or very well yet, that's what I think excites me the most.
That's something actually I think is great about you, Keyan, is just follow your intuition, follow your gut, like experimenting with new things. Like as I think about all this stuff as an early stage venture investor, like incremental is never going to build, you know, the next great big company or the next great big project, right? It's going to be something brand new that's never been done before. So I think you're absolutely right to trust your instincts. I guess, I mean, yeah, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but you know, as you think about some of these different big moves you can make next, it seems like to me two things really jump out of the page when you talk about increasing the user base, or three things jump out of the page. And I'm curious how you're thinking about all three of these. One is just getting people more sat. Seems like a huge problem. Have you considered just integrating like with MoonPay or something like this? You know, we're starting to see other services are doing that now. Like, is getting people sat still the biggest baseline challenge?
Oh, to get them started? No, it doesn't seem so much that. I mean, once we recognize them as like a human user or whatever, the users are very generous on the site, and we'll get them started with sats.
So even, I guess my bigger question is, because you see, you know, we have tens of thousands of people, whatever, 50, 60, 70,000 people viewing the site every month. But I always think to myself, like, how easy is it for them, you know, just to realize, hey, I can like get tipping immediately. You know, I can go from 0 Bitcoin to tip my first post.
Yeah. It's maybe not as simple in. We don't have maybe a ramp for that, because right now it is you sign up, you post a bio maybe, and then you get some sats if people like your bio, and then you can start tipping. And so that maybe that loop is kind of slow, but it you know, it's also difficult where you don't want to like give people free sats when they sign up without verifying they're a human. So maybe having some kind of something easier that's fun to get them to prove that they're a human to start, which will be harder and harder as time goes on, given all the AI stuff that's happening. Mm-hmm. But that's something we've thought about. We haven't thought about it more recently. Right now, it's like just converting the users who are lurkers. Yeah. Like trying to convince them a little more to participate and nudge them to participate is kind of
And just to be clear there, although I love the idea of helping users earn those sats via capture or whatever, so that's a great idea. I meant just like very basic, like, I don't know if you saw recently, like Albi integrated with MoonPay. So now I can just put in my credit card and be like, okay, like bank account, like, a user flow I'm very used to. I just buy whatever, $20 from the sats.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. I think if we can do that easily, I mean, it is kind of high friction, I guess. But I suspect for a certain type of user, it's the kind of friction they're familiar with and wouldn't mind going through. So, yeah, I think that maybe makes more sense in a world where Stacker News isn't geared so specifically to Bitcoin content. Yeah, and so right now it's maybe not the right move, but it's something I think to continue thinking about. I know a lot of products in the space do that have that are trying to fit in a wider
for what it's worth. I mean,
market.
Just since Fountain, they recently integrated with MoonPay and allowed you to kind of buy with I guess your bank account maybe in the last release like a week ago or something. And I will say like it's just already for a lot of people I'm talking to way easier to get them over that hump. Maybe they're Bitcoin curious, but still not there. So something potentially worth chatting with Oscar about.
I wonder if I could mention the N word.
Yeah, I was holding off. I was waiting for you, DK.
Okay, because I know we only have like a half hour planned, and Nostr's sort of been on our collective minds, I think, a bit, and so I'll offer at least a few thoughts to get us going, but really this is meant to be more of like a brainstorm among us to sort of think about what this as a potential new primitive for the internet might mean for Stacker News. So I think we've all were kind of talking about this briefly about a year ago on that Discord we were part of, and it's kind of a compelling and simple idea, but then until you actually have a client that's pretty good, that is usable, it's hard to really know what it would actually look like in practice. And now we have that client. Damus is a pretty good example of that. And so I've sort of been, I think my excitement around Stacker News is that it helps us tie information and publishing and communication to value in a way that doesn't exist before. And so I think that gives us like a view into what that future looks like. And then when I look at Nostr and the way kind of the Damus implementation of Nostr, they're also exploring a similar idea, but with sort of a different architecture underlying it. So they sort of have, you can do lightning tips, which are, forms of stacking. I actually take my lightning tips and push them into my Stacker News wallet. So I have actually nicely integrated because of the NIP5, which we can talk about. But yeah, I feel like some of the core kind of beliefs or hypotheses around what Stacker News is really good at, I think we have like a new architecture for accomplishing related things, different but related with Nostr, and I think kind of the way it's demonstrated with Damus. So, given sort of that as a little bit of preamble, I wonder sort of should Stacker News kind of take this as a moment to consider, more integration points than NIP05, and like what have we learned from the NIP05 integration, and what other things might be next on roadmap there, or is it like a sideshow distraction? We don't want to do that right now, and it's more just like keep the eye on the current path and kind of keep pushing on that. So I think that's why I think it's like a very relevant, because vision-wise it's the same, but architecture it's new. That's kind of what gets me, kind of gets my spidey sense tingling, and that's why I wanted to sort of get us together to put our heads together and see what comes of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's really exciting. DK, you and I had a chat before, and we've been discussing Nostr and Stacker News for I mean, since the beginning of Nostr probably. And Fiatjaf has been in my replies, win Nostr, for like a year. Yeah, I mean, I've always been very excited about Nostr. I'm a fan of reading like internet and like technology history, and it fits well with my understanding of like grassroots kind of technology development, and I that's what I really like about it. Yeah, I think, and I don't think it's a sideshow or a distraction. I think there is something really important going on. I think the biggest problem with a lot of these protocols that preceded Nostr was the lack of an identity that was decentralized, and they've solved that with a really easy thing that a lot of us are familiar with now, given that we have Bitcoin. And they use a similar concept for identity. I think in that thread I shared with you, DK, there are really three things I kind of need, or I'd like to see, or to have a direction to go on, and this doesn't have to be provided for me. I have to provide it for myself, but things like some kind of solve for discovery is like something I'm kind of concerned about. Maybe how that works at scale on something like Nostr, data availability, and like how when I send my data to a relay, I know it's going to be there. Maybe it's there for 100 days, and the 101st day I wake up and it's not there. What happens? That, you know, like how do I incentivize the relay operator to keep it? And then the other thing is spam. So Nostr hasn't had its eternal September moment yet,
Right.
and it will eventually. And it might not. We don't have, like, I'm not. I don't want to predict it, but it likely will happen. And so how does it deal with that? And maybe every relay. What's cool about Nostr is it's like every relay operator can have their own approach, and the best one will win out because it's open. And but that's something like how do we solve that too? Is another thing. So those are like kind of three areas where I would begin thinking about first when I would begin like a deeper integration with Nostr. As far as like more immediate term plans, doing like a read-only relay and seeing what that's like. Maybe doing some delegation for users and posting their content on a Nostr as them might be interesting. But I'd love for Stacker News to be decentralized and relieve me of all the liabilities that we've learned from Jack Dorsey about running a centralized service. So those are like kind of my broad thoughts. I think for now it's an interesting thought exercise to remove the halo that Jack Dorsey imparted to Nostr and see what you think about it then.
Right.
And so I think that is biasing people a little bit. It is still kind of early. I listened to a great podcast on Bitcoin Review with NVK and JB or William and Fiatjaf. And Jack was like, a lot of people are using Nostr because they're running away from things, and what do we do that makes them run toward it? And I think that's an interesting question. I think Stacker News similarly has people are running away from Reddit. They're running away from Twitter. We have some people running toward it for Bitcoin, but maybe that's not super compelling yet. But anyway, that's like kind of my high level thoughts on it.
One thing I want to add in there, because I've, as DK knows, and Keyan, as you will soon know, I've been obsessing over this Nostr stuff. Like, this is the most my sort of spidey senses investor has been going off in a long time. And I think it's for a couple of reasons. One, like the architecture itself does seem, I guess, decentralized and potentially robust enough that if enough people are running relays, like this thing actually could take off. So that's good. And then it actually is having real adoption, right? So, I mean, since December 13th, when Jack tweeted about Nostr to today, we've gone from, at least by some public counts of public keys, which are identities, fewer than 1,000 users to 250,000 users, right? And so that's crazy. right? To see that kind of growth in less than a month. And so there's real interest, there's real demand here. I think some of it is because people are running away. Some of it's honestly, I think the bigger piece more than running away is people are having fun because it's open and they're experimenting. And when you let the nerds tinker, they're going to like create all kinds of beautiful new things and new experiments. Mm-hmm. And so, when I think about some of the different interesting integration points, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, one, and I don't know what the right answer specifically is, a read-only relay or write-only relay, but if you allow, I mean, the first thing I think about is the more developers you get hacking on your project, the better. Like that's just one of my general kind of like things I posit about products in the world, whatever, right? And so, if we can do that, Stacker.News already has an API, but like somehow get the same guys that are building on the Nostr API to build with Stacker.News, that seems like one not necessarily easy win, but like the way to get the most experimentation, the most fruit born. I think that as you publish more content and allow outside users from other Nostr clients to potentially interact with Stacker.News posts, you create two different opportunities. One, those users on Stacker.News can potentially earn much more tips, right? Which is really interesting. So if I put out a post and maybe there's, a couple thousand people tipping on Stacker.News, but now I get, 2 orders of magnitude more that are tipping, all of a sudden, like, wait a second, if I can increase my revenues by 2 orders of magnitude, that's pretty interesting. And then I think the second thing is, and particularly because I think, we have one of the best clients or would have one of the best clients pretty quickly, a lot of people, and maybe this is coming from you running your own relay as part of the client, or in addition to the client as well. But I think that the killer app, a really, really big opportunity here is, as you said, it's going to be search and discovery, which is completely untouched right now. And the more data that you can index, especially with this open standard, now that the people are doing lightning tips, you've got the social graph that's decentralized, the value rank signal that's becoming decentralized. It kind of goes back to the Google thing we've been talking about for months, which is whoever can index the most data, find the best signal from social graph and value rank, I think is probably in the best position. So how does Stacker.News take advantage of that? I don't know, but those are the two big areas that I'm thinking a lot about.
Yeah, and I think the discovery piece that Keyan, you mentioned, I think is an important one. That it's the structure of Stacker.News, I think, could be really helpful to lots of different types of discovery to happen. But I also think the clients in this world and the applications in this world may end up kind of looking a lot different because they're all in competition with every other client, and which is like both like exciting and then also, if you're building a client, maybe terrifying, because it's like, okay, we thought that was where the value is going to be, and now that there's like a new architecture, maybe there's different places to explore where you can create value. So you can kind of still, the same principles that were exciting to begin with, like having value as part of communication and publishing, and kind of making treating the Bitcoin native currency or the internet native currency of Bitcoin as the kind of the marker or the unit to indicate quality or kind of commitment to a piece of published content. I think that still remains and is transitive across projects, but I think the relays are a very interesting touch point, and so I'm happy to hear that you're exploring that, because I think the relays end up being I think it's nice in that the architecture allows for it to be very decentralized, but I think some relays will emerge as like the really good ones, and they may have some centralizing effects, but probably not monopolistic centralizing effects. Just like, as long as they're of service, they can exist and do well. So, I like the idea of experimenting with relays, and I wonder if there are ways to, I don't know, one straw man I'll throw out for kind of brainstorm purposes is like, what if Stacker.News were like the open source software of Stacker.News had a version that was like a Nostr client. So you can do all the light integrations with the existing community as is. Like, I think that's a good first step. And I think you're really good about sequencing these. But if we sort of take the bizarre radical thing, what if it's like a community client that I can use to run like my own, maybe a coffee nerds, Stacker.News equivalent, but using Nostr for all of the kind of identity and kind of message storing and transport. And if you are the provider of the open source software that runs all of the communities, you may point to your own relay, and you might build the relay that's the best relay that has the best discoverability and knows the most about the quality of people and sees where Bitcoin is being transferred, and kind of that's another quality signal. So I almost wonder if, like, in a sense, the client is a little bit of like just a strategic entry point into building better relays and kind of building more relays of, you know, deeper service to the kind of broader community. But I don't know. That's some little straw man brainstorm. I don't know. What's your thoughts or reaction on that?
I mean, I think that's a really interesting point. That it, you know, if Nostr relays are fairly easy to run, many people can run a Nostr relay that has maybe Stacker.News built in as the client for it, and that seems kind of interesting to me. I think one of the struggles with Nostr right now is that the relays are dumb, like they're intentionally dumb. They try to limit what a relay does, and that's great and for a number of things. But it's perhaps a struggle to do certain types of experiences on Nostr because you can't have a client doing so much processing on data that they wait a long time. There's like a huge lag. And there's some Nostr clients you use that it'll sit there loading for like 20 seconds before you actually get anything.
Is that because there's just not enough relay interconnect, or what's the? Why?
I think it's just parsing all of the data and too much data, and then putting it into your feed and in some like structure, and the structure. And I don't believe the protocol, as far as I understand it, has any. You can't indicate to a relay that you want the stream sorted in any particular way. So it just kind of comes in, and the client would sort it. Maybe is my naive understanding. But yeah, I think. So the way I always imagined Stacker.News getting decentralized was kind of like a Bitcoin mempool, and I think Nostr's relays look a lot like a mempool. Especially once they can kind of discover each other and communicate with each other rather than just the clients, which is what they do now. I imagine eventually they'll have relay to relay communication that's like baked into the protocol. And so that becomes kind of interesting. And I like that. But even in a world where I guess the relays are somewhat isolated and the clients are the only things that connect them, you know, maybe that's potentially an interesting area too.
Why
I don't know.
wouldn't relays ultimately, like, so my understanding is relays today, from a protocol perspective, there's no relay to relay communication, but anybody who wants to run, like, let's say you wanted to run the best relay, you could just say, my relay is going to also be a client to every other relay I can know about, right? Yeah. Like it's legit as far as the protocol is concerned. It's just not baked into it. So like, what's to stop? Like, who's doing this today? Is somebody building the best relay in the world, or?
I know there are tons of people. I mean, I don't think there are as many people building relays as they are clients. It seems like from what I've heard Fiatjaf say, he seems to think that there are enough, like the relay software is good enough, and he just wants really good clients. And so that might be true. He seems to be the authoritative source on the thing he invented. But I know there are people who are experimenting with like more performant relays, different kind of architectures for storing messages and sending them out. Maybe things that are a little more efficient than like a kind of naive approach you might make as a first pass. But yeah, I think doing things like connecting to other relays, but then you could crawl for other relays. I mean, I know just with my brief experimentation with this NIP5 stuff, you could literally crawl every person and then query that for their relays, and now you have the entire relay graph eventually. So that can definitely happen, and maybe you don't need explicit relay to relay communication.
I think two very basic experiments that I would love to see, and I think will happen very quickly. One, paid relays. I think Lalo is already putting out on Twitter how to hook up with Aperture and LSATs. I think someone's going to do that pretty quickly, and there's going to be a lot of experimentation over like how do you charge? Is it per post, per kilobyte, whatever. And then I think the other thing, to your point, Keyan, is when you have this giant water hose of data, that's a lot to sort through. And frankly, most people are going to want moderation of some kind. And ideally, it's their own chosen moderation. It's not forced upon them. But I expect to see essentially caching services or content delivery networks arise here as well. And I mean, if you look, when we come back to the search idea, you look at this site, I forget to say, Brugman, Arthur, or whatever, who's got real search and then launched Nostr.ban. That's a very kind of primitive search engine, but I've been working on this post about Nostr and I use that nonstop. That's how I kept finding this post. And what I love about this is it's this kind of blue ocean moment where Google's not going to be indexing there for a while, right? So whoever is there and whoever can build up the best, map of those relays, the best access, whether they run the relays themselves, like you're saying, DK, you have the best, or you have the best, whatever, caching service. I think that's probably the key to the search.
Yeah, I agree. Because I think search has a natural tendency to be somewhat of a centralizing, product feature because it kind of needs to know about global state. And I think one of the head fakes that a lot of people got tricked on with kind of trying to decentralize social media is thinking that you need the global state awareness that you do need for something like money and, to prevent double spend. But you actually don't need that same level or same threshold for most of publishing communication. But for search, you actually do need an understanding of global state. So if you can build a relay or a caching service that has the best understanding of global state, and also these don't live at a given URL. So even if somebody were to, brb.io, I think has got a service that lets you publish it to a particular URL, but then that kind of flattens all the underlying knowledge and information about who published what and what are their relationships with other people on this network. So just all of that signal is, it's basically Google was invented around discovering that signal that was just hidden in plain sight, which is backlinks and all the text used in the anchor backlinks. And I think that is going to be, all that information is going to be invisible to Google for quite a long time because Google's not going to pay attention to this. But I think it's actually super valuable for trying to understand what is the different quality of information. And of course you have, sats baked into some of that. Just the quality of information and sort of the quality of how you do search just seems like it's ready to be changed. I actually don't find ChatGPT that exciting from a search perspective compared to this stuff.
And also in addition to the value rank, your web of trust ideas, imagine that gets applied to the broader Nostr identity system, right? Who is a trusted Nostr public key versus not? I think that's, and obviously everyone can decide for themselves or on their own software, but I think that's really important. I'd like to throw out one other crazy idea, even though I love the search stuff. I think there's a ton to explore there. And DK, I really love the idea of hey, could Stacker News be the kind of almost wiki builder for your community on top? I think that's really cool. That's what came to mind for me. One other thing though, that I can't stop thinking about is what you said, Keyan, this podcast with Jack and MVK. And, he keeps saying that in the first wave, when people exit, they run towards something or they're running away from something. And so as an investor, when I think about this, I think in this first wave of companies, there's going to be some winners, but probably this first wave is not going to be anything new. It's going to be taking the newspaper and putting it online versus building the completely new thing like Twitter.
Yeah,
the Skeuomorphic thing, exactly. Now, the thing that I couldn't sleep last night when I was writing all this down. And it's both something that excites me, but also terrifies me because I've invested in a lot of these traditional Lightning payment companies, remittance type companies. I think they're going to be successful. They have a lot of opportunity. But it just struck me as I was going to sleep last night. I was holy shit, what if none of those companies take off? Because no one uses a payments app for remittances in the future. Or a commerce app for commerce in the future. What if the killer app is going to be, there's some, maybe it's a super app, a decentralized WeChat, maybe it's a different kind of social media app. But I'm in my social media app and I send money back to Mexico or the Philippines or whatever, just as a tweet. And that's it. You never interact with and obviously you still need a way to get it cash and there's other systems there. Or if I'm selling something, there is, even no more Craigslist or whatever. It's just, I'm on Stacker News. I'm on the sub where it's just yep, here's my service I'll sell, or here's my thing. And people just pay everything directly from those communication channels. So the thing that I can't get out of my head is oh man, what if all of the stuff that we're backing for traditional payments is not it, and it's just going to be this next wave of social with payments tied in from the base layer.
I think that I mean that's how payments evolved outside of the United States, it seems.
Yeah.
So there's clearly like a path in like human desires that leads to that. So
Stacker News super app.
Yeah, and I think it's I think it's the super app idea is kind of interesting, but I think also the concept of a super app works in a centralized world, but almost like what is a super app is almost like it's almost like a network service instead of a application service. I still have a tough time. I try so hard to remember this, but when I'm on Damus talking to somebody else, they're not necessarily using Damus. And as much as I understand it, I still don't feel it. I have to remind myself constantly because the architecture is just so new. And so what is a super app in this world? Is it that caching service? Is it a relay service? Is it a list of, Lightning addresses so that you can, a directory of people that you can reliably access? There's probably a bunch of different flavors of what that might look like, but it's also why it's a fun place to be spending time, because it's so Wild West. It's like nobody knows. Are there so can we talk a little bit about the NIP5 integration? I think I know we were DMing about it a few weeks ago, and then I think you were like, yeah, I got a few other priorities, but we'll get to it. And then I think you finally opened it up and said, oh, actually, this is pretty easy. And I think you told me you did it in like a half hour or something. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, what's cool about what I think what Nostr is excellent at and I think all these other protocols just get wrong for some reason right off the bat is developer UX. It's just so dead simple. I mean, you could read all the Nostr improvement proposals in half a day, maybe a morning, and have a fairly good grip of kind of what it's capable of right now.
Improvement possibilities, right?
Are they?
I think they're slightly diverse. I think it's like a fun reference to a BIP, but I think it adopted its own language, if I understand correctly.
Oh, I didn't. Oh, I thought it was proposals. My bad.
Very well
funny.
chosen name.
That's
clearly not a bunch of nerdy dudes.
It was intentionally trying to be a little confusing, but it's a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge, I think.
Yeah, but I mean, everything is like, kind of like very high layer web stuff. It's WebSockets, pretty straightforward. Tons of libraries to interoperate with them. The message formatting is the wire format is JSON. It's all just as far as NIP5, the hard part was mostly recording everything in a database. That was like everything with regard to like the NIP5 stuff. It was just displaying a JSON file for other people to read, which is, I don't know, like maybe a very old kind of object syntax. So very simple.
So once you started NIP5, that was a pretty easy thing to do once you sort of got your head around those bits. Have you explored other NIPs, or are there other things that kind of catch your attention as potential interesting? I don't know, like you've got sort of your first Nostr Stacker News integration. Is there anything else that sort of grabs your attention of what might be next, or what kinds of things you might explore, and how do you sequence those?
Yeah, I think as far as so if I were exploring Nostr as a developer who maybe was only exploring Nostr, I'd probably just begin building both a relay and a client. Is probably what I would do, and just to get because then I would be certain I understand everything entirely. As far as like what is next for Stacker News, it's probably like spinning up an existing relay and interacting with it and seeing what are the limitations of it. How can I make it compatible with what I think users want? Is probably what I'll end up doing. Yeah, but the other NIPs aren't really. They're very client and relay specific. I mean, I could do things like connecting to the users' relays and maybe displaying for them Nostr and Stacker.News is maybe another. We could like merge. We could make Stacker.News sort of a Nostr client. There are things that can be done like that too. But I think the first move would probably just be put Stacker.News' content on a relay. Just because it's one of the struggles I have is not creating too much surface area on the product. It can be a little bit of a struggle for a user's experience when they have too much choice in terms of like where to go on a product. So I think I would just create it as an adjacent thing and see how that goes and play it by ear, I think.
Keyan, have you thought at all, or have you seen William's proposal? I don't know if he's actually put it out as a NIP yet or not, but to have sort of lightning tipping native to Nostr posts. And if so, I mean, to me, one of like the very big things I think a lot of users would love is there a way for them just to receive tips from outside clients?
Yeah, I haven't seen the proposal, but I've heard him talk about it, and I know that's why he created Damus to begin with. And so I'm really curious about how he plans to make that work and what's like required on either the Lightning or Nostr side.
Yeah, I haven't listened to the whole NVK pod yet. I think I'm halfway through a couple hours, but I think I think Fiatjaf was talking about liking to keep Nostr feeling a little more agnostic to Bitcoin. You know, I think a lot of Bitcoiners are excited because there's a lot of common principles and themes that run through it, but it's ultimately like Nostr, you know, maybe could exist. At least it could exist without Bitcoin. We don't know if like it can flourish long term without some underlying monetary solution. But I think there's some hesitation to get the protocol too coupled to Bitcoin too early. And I did see something from William, I think this morning on Nostr, where he was publishing something that was like a Lightning payment that looked like it was not Damus specific, but maybe more Nostr. Have you guys seen that, or did you see that post?
I saw it, but I didn't look too closely into it. I do remember when he first, maybe 2 or 3 days ago, he posted a note about exploring it. He mentioned I might publish this as a NIP or as an LN URL spec. So maybe there's a way to do this from the Lightning side instead of the Nostr side, to be more protocol agnostic.
Is there currently kind of a roadmap or changes? Has anybody heard from Fiatjaf if like sort of how he plans, like what does he plan to do next? Is he gonna add additions to the protocol or just try to evangelize and get more new clients built, or kind of where his head is?
I mean, I'm not too sure. I think he's working actively on a web browser extension right now, is what I thought I saw him doing. But I imagine he's mostly doing like fielding lots of inbound and trying to make sure the kind of community goes in a direction he thinks is the right path is probably what I imagine he's doing. But I think he has a full-time job at ZBD, unless that's changed.
And also, just listening to that guy, I get the impression maybe like he's been prolific. Like it's not like he came out of nowhere. Like he was responsible for, was it LN Tipbot or LN TXBot?
Yeah.
He was one of the early authors.
I think LNTX.
LNTXBot.
Yeah.
He was one of the like primary authors with Ben Ark on all of the early versions of LN Bits, which by the way is doing a lot of cool stuff with Nostr now. So like I get the impression this guy just like he's kind of like almost like a Satoshi, like throws out this beautiful thing and then bounces to the next project. Mm-hmm. So who knows? Maybe he'll give us something brand new.
That'd be awesome. I think he's definitely super prolific. I recall when we had him on for an AMA, one of like Jimmy Song's question to him was like, how do you choose what to work on? Like acknowledging that he is working on so many different things simultaneously. He also did a lot of LN URL work. Like a lot of things that we kind of on some level take for granted in the Bitcoin space. They're so ubiquitous.
And so I think we've got some of our kind of thoughts and brainstorm on Nostr out now. Any other kind of directional things that come to mind for you around stuff you want to explore, or do you feel like you sort of have in mind your current roadmap or kind of current explorations or kind of prototypes you want to do? Sort of, how do you think about splitting your time?
Yeah, I think my time is going to be really hard to split right now, so I'll probably have to hire to do, because I mean I had this conversation with my wife last night, and I'm like I think I can imagine there's like a plan A with Stacker News, and the plan A with Stacker News is I keep making it better, and I keep it's on its path. I refine it, I make it better the way it is. And there's some interesting things I plan to do with sub communities and other types of formats and stuff like that, but it doesn't feel all that exciting to me. As I said before, like risk is kind of what really gets me going. But then there's like a plan B where one of my intentions to begin with was make Stacker News decentralized. It's something I've been talking about since I launched it.
Right.
And so maybe this is the moment to begin actually focusing on that. But it's tricky because I also have a strong connection to my existing users, and so we need to make sure that. And I love the product as it is already, and I use it all the time. So I don't intend for it to go away. But it's like my baby, and I'm going to be away from home. Most of the day or something. How do I manage that with a new kind of thing, a migration to a new architecture, possibly. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, and that excites me a lot, thinking about that. Because otherwise I think I might otherwise be kind of bored, to be honest. So,
yeah, there's sort of. I think it's nice that you've said sort of you are that kind of risk seeking and you sort of don't want to be bored, because I think a lot of technology changes under our feet very frequently, and so kind of listening to your own voice and your own energy, what you have energy for, I think is a great way to find the asymmetries when they pop up. That's not to say that this one that we've talked about is exactly the right one. Like it looks promising and interesting, but like there's still, there's enough risk that it can be very exciting for a long time, I think.
And for what it's worth, just to echo DK there, I mean, and this is something I'm reminding myself right now, kind of putting on the investor hat as well, is like, I haven't been this energized in a long time. Like this feels like to me when I was really learning about Lightning, and over the last year or so, I mean, it's been really fun, but it's like, okay, I get it. Invest in Lightning company in Africa, one in India, one in, it's awesome. They're great. And they're going to do a lot of awesome things, but it's kind of like, all right, like where's the new thing? And I feel like this is such a foundational shift. There's so much potential to rebuild basic internet services. All of the Web3 crap we've heard about for years and years, like those things can actually potentially be done now, but in a way that actually scales. And so, I think, as DK said, like technology can shift very quickly and be able to move with it. Now, obviously, it's a dance because you don't want to go in too early. Like maybe it's the first hype wave and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, like going from less than 1,000 users to 250,000 users, like that's not arguable. And so one thing that I would be thinking about a lot is like, how do we tap and bring some more of those new 250K users into the Stacker user ecosystem in some way, shape, or form? Maybe that's its own sort of subreddit or sort of sub Stacker News around Nostr, or maybe it's by turning this into a client. I don't know. But that seems like kind of like a first good step is if you've got orders of magnitude of new interested people, how do we bring them into the discussion? And then from there, I mean, who knows, right? Like, but I guess one question I did have on that, because I don't have a good answer to this, is if we saw that much growth and Damus is capped at 10K users because of test flight, where are these people coming on? I mean, I assume a lot of them are I created keys like in Albi. That's one place. I know some of the other clients will help you get on, but like if Damus is the famous one and that's 10K users and there's 250K new pub keys, where's the other 240 coming from? That seems like a good question to answer as we think about where to steer the ship.
Right. Yeah, and I would guess it's got to be the web, right? Like, what?
Yeah, I think a lot of the clients on the web, when you join them, it immediately creates a private key pair for you, and so yeah, I don't know how these measurements are made, but I know someone who was spamming Nostr as an experiment, and they were generating a new pub key for every message, in addition to a new Tor address or onion address, and so there's probably some spoofing of of that going on, but I suspect, there's so many clients. I mean, as a developer, you're developing on these things. You're probably generating a bunch of them as you go. But I mean, those numbers are undeniably large. So
even if you smooth half of it,
you take an order of magnitude away, it's still a very big number. So.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about the numbers as much as the fact that, like, if you go on and look at the fire hose, there's real new people showing up all the time. You can talk to them. They're interested to explore. It's not just like, some sort of, spam, people are coming on because you're generally curious. And I think that to me, that's what I really get excited about, is just seeing real people show up being curious about it. The actual numbers are hard to really pin down, I'd say, but the human energy around it.
One thing, palpable. Just as we're spitballing, kind of congealing some of these ideas, DK, you made a great point to me maybe a week or so ago, which is, how does Nostr expand outside of just Bitcoin? Obviously, we all love Bitcoin. I think it's been a great strategic decision for Stacker News to be the Bitcoin signal spot. Having said that, if we go mainstream, like, there's only so many people that care about Austrian economics and blah, 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 whatever. As fascinating as we all find it to be. But, DK, you made a great point to me, which is that, like, within the Bitcoiners, there's people, like, we're not just Bitcoiners. We have other interests. There's alpine skiers in there, or we were both extremely interested in, like, this artificial intelligence wave that's happening. Or in my case, I'm super interested in music and hip hop. Like, I wonder if there's some way, and maybe this ties in even, Keyan, I know you had the kind of the referral system you were playing with, where, is this a moment somehow that we get some of these Bitcoiners to say, hey, can you start onboarding people into other communities? Maybe you create, maybe Stacker News the wiki, maybe you help on the first couple or whatever, but where Bitcoin is not the focus, but it's the other thing that you're super passionate about. Like, I would love a hip hop subreddit or Substack, something like Substacker, you know what I mean?
Yeah, we call them subs, I think, because it's just because there's so much of this confusion. It's the shared pivot point between all the different names. I think other communities are right there. I think we're pretty much ready for them. I think there's been a debate over the last couple of months about it, and we just wanted to really make sure we were ready and had our mind in the right place when we started doing it, and wouldn't just spread our users too thin across too many sub communities and create a ghost town of a kind. Mm-hmm. So Nostr, I think, would be an interesting one to start with. There are adjacent subtopics like programming generally, maybe, or some of these other adjacent areas. But Nostr could be interesting to start. But I kind of like the idea of users deciding. So maybe we'll have some back and forth with them.
Yeah. What's the current vibe from users on the site? Are people talking about Nostr? Like, I've been involved in a few threads, but I don't think I have as much an overall purview feel for what's really going on.
I would suspect, it seems like any given day, there's probably like 2 or 3 top posts that are Nostr related. We have one top post that's Nostr related today, which is kind of small, but I think over the last, if I look on the last week or so, I would guess there's far more. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so 5 of the top 21 posts in the last, 6 in the last week were all Nostr posts. So lots of overlap.
Nice. Another kind of idea that I was going to float is, I think you're right to be cautious about launching a second Stacker News because you don't want to create that ghost town feel. And I think just having one vibrant town is, even itself challenging. So, you've been a good steward and owner and instigator there, Keyan. I think without your pushing, that wouldn't exist. And so it's hard to imagine exactly who in the gardening vertical or alpine skiing vertical is going to take so much ownership. Yeah. But I do wonder if we were to think about the problem as maybe more in service of a creator who would be their own instigation point. So, one example that comes to mind, I don't know if you follow Anthony Pompliano and the Pomp podcast and stuff, but I think about a week or so ago, he kind of finally gave up with advertising, and he says, I'm not going to run ads anymore. And I think part of it was maybe, was he involved with FTX, or he had some fallout with some
There's a couple. Yeah.
BlockFi, right.
Yeah, all of it.
Exactly. I think that's the joke, is like that what Bitcoin did. It's like whoever they sponsor goes under.
So, but given that state of the world, and he doesn't really know what's next, but like maybe he would want to run the Pomp Stacker News, sub, where he, it's still a little pretty Bitcoin flavored, but maybe he curates who's allowed to come on, and he gives more access to special content that he creates only there, and he gets paid. The whole community is basically, instead of people coming to earn sats, they come to pay him sats for his kind of instigation and creativity work. So it's kind of a different, then he has the responsibility to make it not a ghost town, and we don't have to find the, alpine skier, Bitcoiner overlap to take the ownership that you have.
Yeah, that's a good point. Finding someone like that. Another way I've thought about this is, we thought about these subs, they would be pay to create them. So they're small in dollar terms, like maybe 10,000 sats a month or something. And you would create them in the hopes of earning that back from the usage on it. But that would ensure that they have skin in the game, and they actually are really invested in the topic and seeing a community thrive. And then they also wouldn't get the burnout that you get on other types of platforms where there is no real incentive to be that person in the community. And so, that's maybe another way, is actually we just open it up entirely for them to choose. And because we don't have to really open it up and like floodgates open up, we could just create it costs a little bit of money to do it.
And you can also play with the incentives of should 80% go to the instigator or creator and 20% to the community, or like there's probably a bunch of knobs and dials there that would attract different types of people.
Yeah. Give them the options.
There's a service called Circle.so, which is not a decentralized, not a Nostr client, but I don't know if you've seen that, but it's kind of, think of it like, it's sort of like a Slack or a Discord type thing, but instead of it being more team or community oriented, it's really creator centric. And so I think there's a lot of good ideas that they have explored over the years around how a creator can organize people interested in the creativity and the work that they put out to sort of organize for, special access, community participation, special content. Of course, it's not in any of this world that we're talking about, but maybe some of the ideas that they've explored and learned through would be the kind of things that would be interesting to people kind of in these communities that we're talking about.
I'd be interested to see, kind of related to all this, but like the podcast and 2.0 value for value stuff. Like, I think that's actually grown quite a lot over the last year. I think now there's like 11 or 12K or something podcasts that are value for value enabled. I think that's going to explode in the coming year. Maybe, and I've talked with Oscar and a couple of people about this, maybe it ends up getting tied to Nostr somehow, where you actually can store the audio data. Obviously, it would be like more expensive, but something kind of interesting. That'd be a sub that I think would be pretty cool too.
Yeah, what's nice about a podcast sub would be that there's content that we could pull pretty much automatically, and so there has no possibility of being a ghost town. Yeah, that's something we've thought about. That was like one of the first ideas that got floated around for subs, was like value for value. Oscar and I have even had conversations around how we might be able to do something together there. But yeah, I've been really impressed by the growth in the podcasting space in general. I've just been like too in my own head to listen to podcasts recently, but it seems to, I just went and listened to that NVK podcast, and then I'm back in the Fountain client for the first time in like 6 months or something. I'm like, wow, this thing is really polished up. It's very nice, and a bunch of comments and boosts and stuff. So really, really impressed with everything that's going on there.
And again, what I was just going to say on that is, and again, I think this all ties back into Stacker News being decentralized, Nostr being decentralized. I think you're going to see if the RSS somehow, the podcast RSS feeds can coordinate with Nostr. I mean, like that's an easy way to do inter-app messaging, which is still something that's kind of hood today. I mean, it sort of works, But again, that's the beauty of it is from my fountain app, I can already see, like I commented on the Value for Value podcast and vacated before this one. And it was so cool. I sent them like, my little boostergram, everyone was like sending me sats back saying, oh, this is great. We're glad you liked it so much. People I didn't even know, people that ran the podcast. And then, but if I went to Breeze, I could still read all of that. It's all interoperable. And so I think that, again, like being able to interact with one global feed of information from a lot of different places, like I think we're just seeing the tip of it.
Yeah. That's basically the web. I mean, if you think it has a very similar type of vibe, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I know we're over time. We only really booked an hour, but we could, I'm sure, keep going for another 2 or 3 hours. But I want to respect everybody's time. So I'll kind of wrap with a thank you to Keyan for coming and sharing your thoughts and being pretty open-minded and open-ended about kind of our strawmans and brainstorms. And it's great to hear from a practitioner like you who is sort of in it and figuring out how to balance and weigh and manage these trade-offs. I think it really helps me to think better about the space, and I think it hopefully will help other people building to kind of think about those trade-offs too. So always fun whenever we get a chance to do these. I hope we can do another one soon. And as your thinking is evolving, don't hesitate to ping us, of course.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun. I learned so much from you guys. I should talk to you more. I don't know why I don't, but I guess yeah. But you guys are great.
Likewise, yeah. This was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us for this conversation with Keyan and Max. I'm excited to keep having more conversations about Nostr, and I hope you can join me on the journey as I keep learning more about this emerging technology. Sign up for my newsletter at curiousdk.com to follow along.